What is freedom? Well, certainly there are different definitions, and we could talk about it in terms of an individual being free in a certain community or nation or whatever, like from a political standpoint and so forth. There are many other ways to talk about it, but what I want to talk about here is the freedom that is always available. The freedom that is here already. It's already in your experience. It's actually the totality of experience. And so this is why sometimes the first time we really encounter that experience of freedom is when we stop trying to be someone, when we stop trying to be what we think we need to be, when we stop trying to defend any position, when we stop trying to discern this from that, picking and choosing and so forth. When that subsides, when the belief that we can change reality somehow by imagining, when that subsides, then often we're very pleasantly surprised at how available freedom actually is. The freedom isn't in the ability to do what you want in the way our minds would think about this. The ability to change reality into what we want reality to be, that's not freedom at all. That's imprisonment. That's a mental trap. That's seeing, it's looking with a very narrow focus through the lens of thought and seeing a very small, contracted experience of reality, of yourself. And it's unsettling and unsatisfying to do that. And it's also the human condition. Most people function this way throughout the day. And it kind of puts you in this almost sleepwalking state. But there's a freedom that's available when we see that what I just said is true, that we are narrowing our focus into this certain kind of bandwidth of thought. And we are actually reacting to a lot of unrecognized, repressed fears, repressed emotion, misunderstandings about who we are, who we need to be. And we're playing this sort of shell game with ourselves where we're constantly trying to reshape our identity into what we think it needs to be or what it needs to look like based on all kinds of things, conscious and unconscious. And a lot of it's unconscious. Expectations that were placed on us by our parents or just by experiences in life and so forth. So that's a narrow way of experiencing reality through the lens of thought. I might call that thought identification or mind identification. But there's a very different way to experience reality. And essentially that is by not narrowing the bandwidth of perception, by noticing that even when that bandwidth of perception is narrowed, when the attention cone is narrowed, there's also still the universal perspective that doesn't have a specific perspective. There's also the wide openness that's already here, always already here. This is why I often say things like you can't force awakening to happen. You can't force the hand of reality because you can't enter a room you've never left. You're already here. It's already the case. And if something makes your experience feel small and contracted, it doesn't mean you need to find something else. It's more of what you stop doing. You stop believing that. You stop believing those thoughts that tell you you need to XYZ. You need to be this. You need to go there. You need to get this. You need to acquire that. You need to understand this. That sense of needing all of that is like a carrot on a stick, that your mind is holding the stick, dangling the carrot of later when or the future, including later when you have a spiritual awakening or whatever the mind is imagining. It's really just holding its own stick with a carrot at the end of it and chasing it, right? The mind, the thoughts chasing one another around inside your cranium are really just carrots on a stick. When you're able to stop giving all of that mechanism so much attention, just let it settle right now. And then you have an opportunity to recognize that which does not chase anything. It's not looking for anything. It never went anywhere. It doesn't come and go. It doesn't have an entry and exit point. That's what I'm pointing to. And the knowing of that, the living of that, where it's instinctually clear that that is it. It's far more natural and real and simple than the mind chasing itself around thought after thought, and then the feeling of being stuck in that space. This is so much more fluid, natural, vast, expansive than that. It's also more intimate than that. And it feels like freedom. The freedom of aliveness. The freedom of aliveness to express and be just what it is, unapologetically, simply, and all-encompassing, leaving nothing out. Nothing is left out, including narrow views, which is hilarious. It's when we're identified with the narrow view of me that we're suffering. But when we see that there was no one suffering, there was no one that view was binding. There was no one that was subject to that view. That's the key. When we see that, then all of a sudden the freedom is here. It's here. It's so clear. And a narrow view can form, and so what? A thought can come and go, and so what? A belief can come and go, and so what? An identity structure can seem to be there and then seem to completely disappear, and so what? The freedom is already here. The freedom just is. This is freedom.